welcome to this evening's event. My name is Jacob Palmer. I am working here at RecWorks. We're a community-driven recruiter that put on a lot of events like that. Might be the first time you'll see me. It's usually Barry introducing these kinds of events, who's the kind of main organizer with the front engineers community, and we also run a few other events as well, like the London Java community. But we're a recruiter that try and by a mission to try and show that recruiters can be a force for good, and put on events like this and try and help people progress in their career, not just about placing people in roles as well. Absolute pleasure to have Minko here with us, giving his talk on the state of Angular at the moment. I'm very keen to hear about the sort of the introductions to Angular, and I think we'll leave it to Minko to take it away and take us through the slides. So over to you, Minko.
Awesome. Hello, everyone. My name is Minko Gechev. I'm leading developer relations for the Angular team at Google. Today, in this short presentation, I would want to share with you what is the current state of Angular. I would want to talk about some of the strengths of the framework, what we have been up to lately, and where the framework will be going in the future. So I'm not going to spend far too much time in this content, maybe about 20 minutes. And right after that, I'd love to just chat, answer questions about Angular, talk about web development, and life. All right. So before going any further, I want to just to share a couple of, just wants to make sure that I manifest the core values that we have in the Angular team. We generally want to build a framework that allows developers to build applications that users love to use. This is probably one of our core goals, to enable developers to build delightful applications. But at the same time, folks need to love to use the framework. So we have been focusing on development experience very vigorously recently. We have been trying to make the CLI as easy to use as possible, providing the best feature capabilities, and so on and so forth. But we're also in the unique position to have a really fantastic community with over 1.5 million developers. Like, it's really hard to measure, but we have been in this unique position to accept a lot of great contributions from people, not only in terms of contributions to the code base, but also Stack Overflow answers, public talks, articles, and many others. So for us, it's also really important for everyone to feel welcome in this community. We have been successful in this, sometimes more than others, and we have been trying to keep the success to be more consistent. So I'm hoping that we'll be doing even better job in the future. When on community events or conferences or like talking to customers, when I'm talking to folks in general, they're usually giving me a heads up for the core strengths of the framework as being opinionated and helping them to build more large, successful projects with large teams as well, where you can move from one project to another without having to relearn best practices again and again. This also brings some scalability. So it doesn't matter whether you're building a small application or a larger one. Since the best practices are mostly baked into the Angular CLI, we have been trying to keep applications consistent without too much distraction and having too many ways to do things. The evergreenness is something that we have been actually putting a lot of effort in. This is something that I'm going to talk mostly about in the next couple of minutes. The evergreenness is this feature that allows us to keep Angular up to date for everyone, or at least make the update experience as smooth as possible. There are a lot of technical challenges here that we're going to discuss in a bit. And I'm going to stop on this in just a little bit. But clearly, the ecosystem is another benefit. There are a couple of JavaScript frameworks currently that are in this position to have really fantastic ecosystem with a lot of third-party developers building tools, building different libraries, and content that helps everyone. All the users of Angular and even the end users by having high quality experience enabled by these ecosystem tools. Now let us spend some time talking about the evergreenness, because I believe this is the most unique feature that Angular provides. Clearly, opinionation and scalability are two really high strengths as well, but with very strict constraints, you can probably enable this with other solutions as well. Maybe the consistency is going to be a little bit tougher, but I still think that the evergreenness is something unique, which is in fact enabled by the organization that we have inside of the company. So to understand how we are making Angular evergreen, we can just look briefly into how are we managing the Angular project within Google. I have said here that the only constant is change, because that's really what I noticed for my about 2-year experience in Google. I didn't start too long ago. It was about two years and 1 month on the 5th of November, 2018. Back then, I was part of the ads organization. Angular.js originally, and later on Angular, was part of ads, and we were helping different ads products to be successful on the web. Later on, however, we moved to a different organization, after that to another one, and at a certain point, they gave us these candies here of GPI, Google Product Infrastructure. So I found this candy maybe about... I
found this on the web.
Oops, sorry, my Google Assistant thought that I'm asking it a question. I found this candy about a month after we have been moved to another organization. So I didn't have even the chance to eat this candy before they reorged us again. This was just like a constant strive to make Google in general more efficient and enable developers to communicate smoother across the organization. So the Angular team is an infrastructural team. We're building a product, but this product is entirely targeting developers. We're not building product for end users. We're building infrastructure for web development. One of the rules for infrastructural teams inside of the company is that we need to make sure that all the users of our infrastructure are staying up to date with the latest changes that we introduce. So currently, the organization that we are at looks something like this. We have Google at top, we have core systems, which is the organization where most of the infrastructural teams within Google exist in. And inside of core systems, we have like different smaller organizations or teams. For example, we have the foundations teams, the TypeScript, JavaScript team, the build and serve team, and we have two main web frameworks, Angular and Wiz. We have been working really closely with Wiz to make sure that we cover the different use cases that we're best at in the best possible way and drive inspiration to one another. Originally, we were trying, in fact, to converge, but we saw that we are like very different philosophically, so it didn't make too much sense to do that. Something interesting for Google that I already mentioned is that the individual teams support all the projects that are using their own technology. So we support all the different projects within Google that are using Angular. And well, since 2016, the number of projects grew quite a lot. On the 14th of September 2016 was the day when we released Angular. Back then, I wasn't actually part of the team. I was just contributing in my spare time to the framework. I just moved to the Bay Area, to San Francisco. At that time, I was working on my startup, and I participated on this event. It was in Mountain View in one large conference room. There were like balloons, cake, there was like everything. I was pretty excited to be there. Back then, 4 years ago, Google just started, like Angular just started, and Google team just started using the framework. Since then, there are over 2,600 projects inside of the company that are using Angular. These projects vary from small applications for, like, let's say, cafeterias or dashboards, to really large apps, such as Google Cloud Console, which was, I believe, 1.5 million lines of code over a year ago. So yeah, there are quite a few projects that are using the framework, and we're responsible for maintaining all of them. These 2,600 projects have hundreds of thousands of TypeScript files, which are not only Angular, but primarily. So the way that we're keeping track of making sure that everyone is up to date and we're not breaking anyone with the framework is thanks to the source code organization inside of the company. So usually, probably you're familiar with the different ways to manage source code. You can either have multiple different repositories for each individual package. You can have one monorepo where you're keeping all your source code, or you can have a hybrid approach, something in between, where you have, let's say, your component library in one repository and your projects in another, or a hybrid approach in the middle. In Google, we have a single monorepo for all the billions of lines of code that we manage inside of the entire organization. Angular is originally hosted on GitHub, but every day we're taking all the commits from GitHub and we're pushing them inside of the monorepo. When we push the commits inside of the monorepo, we actually run the CI, which discovers all the project dependencies. So it discovers all the project dependents on Angular, and it runs its test targets. And there are hundreds of thousands of test targets. So if we have broken something, we immediately notice that. And we can either roll back the change or make sure that we fix the breakage, and this way move forward. So this structure in general helps us in a couple of different ways. As I mentioned already, with stability, we know if we break something. Like even if you have 100% test coverage, it is you still don't have a guarantee that you're not going to hit some random sequence of let's say different logical statements, and you still don't have the guarantee that you'll be able to cover all the different use cases and public APIs of a given piece of software. We still don't have this guarantee with these 2,600 projects, but we have pretty high level of confidence that if we don't break any of our customers, we're not going to break anyone in the world. This also helps us with automation. Although we want to just keep Angular backward compatible, sometimes we want to break stuff. Sometimes we want to make sure that the framework innovates and we introduce new, more powerful APIs. We move forwards together with the web platform. So in such cases, we implement migration scripts. These migration scripts, we run across all these 2,600 projects, and we migrate them automatically to the latest version of Angular and the framework APIs that we created. But we also use them for the ng update experience. So this way, they're really well tested in this sandboxed environment inside of Google so that everyone outside of Google can use them for free and make sure that they are taking advantage of the latest improvements that we have introduced. Innovation clearly is another way. So having the single monorepo, we can see how different folks are using the framework, find different patterns, and from there decide what we should encourage for broader usage and what new APIs we can introduce. Well, yeah, for the end user, the thing that you're getting from this source code organization is just security, that your application is not going to get broken and you're not going to spend like weeks in migration. And at the same time, you have this ng update command that you'd be able to use to move yourself to the latest version of the framework. Now, we have been having a lot of discussions with community and with different organizations on how are we prioritizing issues and how are we prioritizing in general our work. So I want to spend some time talking about this as well. Usually the main stakeholders of Angular are developers and they are users, the users of the web. It is really interesting, however, that sometimes what is good for the users of the web, let's say differential loading, does not provide the best development experience ever. Because, well, let's say that this is going to increase your build time. So there are very often some really interesting competing concerns that we need to think about and different trade-offs that we need to make. I'm saying that developers are one of our main stakeholders, but there are also quite a few of them. So only the Angular language service has been downloaded over 1.7 million times over the past, well, since we published it. And not everyone is using the language service. So some folks are using, let's say, WebStorm and not VS Code. So my guess is that there are many more developers out there, but as I mentioned, it's really hard to count. So from these developers, we get a lot of requirements in variety of formats. For example, we have quite a few GitHub issues, and some of them have really great ideas, but others maybe not that appropriate for Angular. So we need to go through all of them and read them, understand them, and triage them to make sure that we're satisfying users' in general requirements. We have a lot of feature requests from customers, from enterprises and startups. We run at least one survey a year. This year, we're going to run 4 of them. We also have a decent amount of technical depth. We get a lot of feedback from Google developer experts, interviews, and so on and so forth. So generally, when we collect all these different feature requests and requirements, we try to look at our values, and we try to judge whether this is going to be good for the users of the web, whether this is going to make applications more accessible and faster, whether this is going to impact the development experience, and how we can implement it in an inclusive way. Clearly, sometimes we weren't able to find the best trade-off and satisfy our core values to the best possible extent, but we're doing our best. Usually when we find an intersection across all of these, we go ahead and prioritize a given feature and implement it. So that's the very high level of prioritization. I can share with you even more details about this, since this has been really challenging and probably one of the most challenging things that we had to deal with. So we can chat more about it after the presentation. The biggest thing, in my opinion, that happened in Angular in 2020 was the release of Angular version 9, when we made Ivy, our rendering and compilation pipeline, generally available. We spent a lot of time working on this project. Literally, we spent 2-3 years. And it was pretty much a rewrite of Angular that we were able to make available without significant breaking changes, only thanks to this internal organization that we have inside of the company. It made bundles really much smaller, and it opened some doors for future improvements of Angular that we're planning now. In the meantime, however, we collected quite a lot of technical debt. We collected quite a few issues that we needed to triage, and we also had to remove some source code from the previous rendering engine and compilation pipeline that we're still working on. So the general focus of version 11 was to make sure that we're listening to folks and we're fixing issues, performance improvements, and some development experience improvements as well. So Operation Bylog. This was our effort to triage all the issues across our 3 monorepos. We went through about 4,000 or 4,500 issues. We read them, we understood them, and triaged them by putting them in different categories and prioritizing them accordingly. We were able to fix hundreds of issues on the Angular CLI and quite a few issues on Angular framework, where we focused primarily on the lowest hanging fruit, issues that were very highly requested, which we were able to do without any significant breaking changes. For example, we did quite a few improvements in router, in forms, and probably the biggest win for us was to implement the third most requested feature in Angular, which is to able to use translation strings outside of the Angular templates. This is in particular related to the Angular's internationalization pipeline. So this is now available, and well, you can take advantage of this if you're building accessible web applications with different languages. We did quite a few improvements on our internationalization pipeline as well. This is a unique approach to implement internationalization because we do it at build time, in contrast to most other approaches that I'm familiar with, where you have different languages loaded at runtime and you're able to dynamically swap translations, which adds some performance penalty. Well, this approach had its own trade-offs. We had to build the application multiple times for each individual language, but well, with the latest implementation available in Ivy, now you can do it with only a single build. You can learn more about this feature in the blog post by Pete Bacon-Darwin from the Angular framework team, who explains everything in depth. Something that we have never heard is that someone's builds are fast enough. Like, this is generally an issue for anyone. And that's pretty accurate. I am never satisfied with my build speed as well. This leads to context switching. Generally, I'm getting annoyed, especially if I haven't had my morning coffee, and so on and so forth. So we worked on making NGCC faster, and we were able to make it from 2 to 4 times faster, depending on whether you're using parallel or sequential mode of compilation. We also found some potential improvements in the TypeScript compiler that are going to make the Angular compilation pipeline faster as well. So Jos from the Angular compiler team has spent some time into investigating how we can improve the performance of the TypeScript compiler so that Angular and actually the entire ecosystem that is using TypeScript could benefit from that. This is going to land, I believe, in TypeScript 4.1. So it is still not available, but it's coming soon. Hot module replacement. This is something else that we spent quite some time, well, not actually too much time working on, but it has pretty good impact on the overall development experience. With hot module replacement, what you could do is start developing your application, and on every code change, instead of reloading the entire page, Webpack is going to send an update over WebSockets to the web page. That is going to notify the web page that something in your source file has changed. From there, the browser is going to send a couple of requests to the Webpack development server to fetch the changed files. And from there, we're going to reload your Angular application without actually corrupting most of its state. So this is probably the most loved feature as part of Angular version 11 that you can take advantage of today. Yeah, I already mentioned HMR as part of Angular version 11. We also implemented experimental and preview support for Webpack version 5. Thanks to the amazing Angular community, we now have ESLint support for Angular and TypeScript that you can take advantage of today and move away from the deprecated ESLint. And clearly, we fixed quite a few bug fixes. We also implemented component test harnesses for all the Angular material components that you can take advantage of today so that your end-to-end tests are more stable. We worked on improvements on the CLI output and the internationalization pipeline and a few other things that I already mentioned. All right, now let us talk about what's coming up next at Q4 and beyond. Generally, I don't want to talk about a particular release because we have committed so far to have our releases to be time-based without coupling to a particular set of features. If given feature is ready on time for the release, this means that we're going to ship it as part of it. Alternatively, we're going to ship it as part of the next major version of this, as part of the next minor version if this allows. So what is coming up next? We have been working with the Chrome Web SDK team to make sure that applications built with Angular have pretty decent Web Vital results. The first improvement that we implemented was actually part of Angular version 11, where we're now inlining Google fonts so that we can speed up your largest contentful paint. Another improvement that is going to probably land in version 11.1, 11.2, or 12, so in the next 6 months, is inlining of render blocking resources. So here we're going to pretty much take all your external CSS that we're currently loading with the link tag. We're going to analyze it and see what parts of it you're in fact using in your index.html. From there, we're going to inline this as being the critical CSS, and we're going to lazy load the rest of your CSS so that it is not blocking the page's rendering. This is going to have support for client-side rendered applications if you have more complicated structure of index.html. we're going to have support for server-side rendering, app show, and pre-rendering. With some very early tests on mobile, this brings about 3.7 seconds improvement for first contentful paint. I believe that was for Angular IO. And the cool thing is that, well, I already spent quite some time talking about the evergreen. So anyone should be able to take advantage of this feature when it is out by running ng update angular/CLI, and it is going to be enabled by default. So a couple of other things that are primarily focused on development experience. In version 12, we're expecting to have stable release and stable support for Webpack version 5. The community has been doing an amazing job in making sure that Angular has a smooth integration story for micro frontends, especially Manfred Stair, who is one of our Angular GDs. Well, there is already a path forward, but with version 12, this is going to become much more stable. We have been working heavily on Angular DevTools. This tool is something that I'm going to spend a few more seconds talking about in a little bit. But in general, we're in a pretty close stage to releasing it. It pretty much depends on how are we going to integrate it with the framework at this point. And from there, we can share it for early preview. Something that has been on our radar for a bit is optional ng modules. We still want to keep all the existing applications work and keep a single way of doing things, but for certain applications, just having so many extra modules doesn't make too much sense, especially when you're building smaller apps. ng modules has been also one more concept that folks getting started with the framework needs to learn. So that's why we want to make them optional and provide alternative ways to declare the scope of your templates. And zoneless or manual change detection is another effort that is still in a very early stage of planning that we have been looking at. So Angular DevTools. I'm sure that you're probably familiar with Augury. Augury is a Chrome DevTools extension that allows you to preview your component structure and also change your local component states and preview the updates. This extension was built by Rango.io, a consultancy company, which has really good expertise in building such Chrome DevTools extensions and development tooling. So we partnered with them to develop Angular DevTools. This is one of the screenshots from there. In contrast to Augury, however, Angular DevTools also has this profiling capability where you are able to detect how many change detection cycles your application has run, what was the trigger of a particular change detection cycle, and how much time did you spend in this change detection cycle overall, how much time you spent in change detection, lifecycle hooks, or output execution. Well, zoneless. I don't know if you've watched this talk by Mishko on Angular Connect last year, but he gave an overview on how are we making Angular fast. There he talked a lot about the internal JavaScript VM optimizations that we're taking advantage of in order to make sure the Angular change detection consumes the least amount of memory possible and also has fewer computational cycles as well. However, one of the drawbacks that currently the Angular change detection has is that sometimes it runs too frequently. It in fact runs after the microtask queue of the browser is empty. So for large applications, this can cause some frame drops as well, which is not ideal. Clearly, there are many easy ways to fix it by using out-push change detection or coalescing of the framework's change detection cycles. But we want to make it easier for folks to stay away from such performance pitfalls. So as part of the zoneless effort, we'll be thinking and developing and designing a manual Angular change detection approach that is going to enable you to have faster runtime for your Angular applications. And well, at the same time, we're trying to do that in an inclusive way where our Angular community is aware of what is happening and can join us in some of our engineering decisions. So we released our Angular roadmap that is now available at angular.io/guide/roadmap. You can follow up the updates there from version 11 as well. These are not necessarily the small projects that we're shipping as part of every release. These are usually larger efforts that are taking sometimes weeks or months of implementation. So the progress there might look slower compared to what you're actually seeing as part of the release announcements. We're also running an RFC program right now. So we'll be running a couple of RFCs for upcoming efforts in the next couple of months. So just make sure that you're following Angular on Twitter to stay up to date with our latest designs. Well, yeah, that was pretty much everything. I was able to show you a couple of the efforts that we have been tackling to enable developers to build applications that users love to use. For example, inlining of critical CSS and Google Fonts to enable faster web vitals, especially largest contentful paint and first contentful paint. A couple of the features focused on development experience are Angular DevTools, our hot module replacement, and working for faster Angular compiler, including also the zoneless effort that we have planned for the future. And at the same time, well, we have been running quite a few RFCs recently, actually only 2, not too many. We hope this to be valuable for everyone, but so far we had really good indicators. We were able to improve our design thanks to very passionate folks' feedback. And we are planning to continue doing that in the future as well. That's everything that I had prepared for you today. I would love to spend some time chatting about Angular and web development. I see that there is something going on in the chat. Oh yeah, there is a statement that Mark dropped from after Angular 1 because it was quite bad. So he's hoping that it's better since then. Well, yeah, feel free to give it a try. I hope you're going to enjoy it. And yeah, feel free to share your feedback as well. I'm available on Twitter at mgechev. Yeah, share your thoughts there. I'm actually pretty satisfied with AngularJS. Back then in 2010, when it was released, the web landscape looked very different. We had jQuery was the trending JavaScript library. We had Backbone, AngularJS, Ember, and that was it. Any questions about Angular or the state of web development? Yeah, Zatin is saying that he's surprised that there is so much code held in a single model repo. Yeah, it's really interesting. There are quite a few talks on YouTube that you can check, and also the paper that I recommended. It's over 1 billion lines of code. It's only possible to build it because of our build system that is Bazel. And Bazel has a really strong level of parallelism, so it can build many different targets at once. And in Google, we have a lot of computational power. So we are able to run this in parallel across many different machines in Google Cloud. There is Mark is sharing. I've worked a lot with React and Vue. I'd love to hear some parallels to those frameworks with how you solve and approach stuff. I used React actually for my startup, and my startup was successful. I don't think the technology was primarily what made it successful, but I had good experience using React as well. There are clearly some differences between Angular and React. Probably the biggest one is that React is just a library that provides you primitives for building components at this point, and probably some state management with hooks. where you don't have a router, you don't have an official CLI, you have create React app, which I don't know if it's maintained by the same team. And so clearly you have fewer integrations with first-party tools that are developed by the same team, and you have to assemble a lot of it by yourself. In Angular, which gives you flexibility at the same time, like it all has trade-offs. There is nothing like one is like, I'm not saying that one is better than the other. Just you have higher flexibility with certain costs. For example, the integration cost is something that many enterprises, for example, and startups are not ready to take. ng updates that I shared is something unique to Angular because we own a lot of stuff. Like we own the components toolkit that we're recommending, the CLI, the framework, the router, and forms. At the same time, sometimes we don't want to break stuff. So we want to make sure that things are safe. And this could prevent us from moving really fast and introducing new APIs that we're excited about. So this could be accepted as kind of cons of our approach as well. So yeah, I guess trade-offs. Yeah, thank you for the questions. I see that there is a question about how close are we working with Angular Dart. We were working really closely with Angular Dart originally. We were actually from a single code base. We had a single code base that was developed in TypeScript. It had some abstractions, and from there we had two different compilation targets, JavaScript and Dart. After that, like this made things really complicated. So at a certain point, it didn't make sense to maintain the same repository structure, and both frameworks went in different directions. So now at this point, we are even in different organizations with Angular Dart. We're not maintaining close relationships. I guess the only thing that is left to be similar is the name and the component model. Zlatanis is asking, does Angular complexity makes it more difficult to learn and start with from the ground up? I guess this depends on the learning path. I spent a lot of time thinking about it over the past like 2 years at least. And thinking about it looks like if you start gradually, in order to build an Angular application currently, you need to install the Angular CLI and run ng-new. From there, to build an Angular component, you need an ng module and one Angular component. So that's all you need. If you want to follow best practices in your application to scale well over time, you need to understand dependency injection, but this comes later on. It's similar with other frameworks as well. If you want to make your code testable, you can either use like context or the alternative approach in the different frameworks, or like just like couple yourself to the business logic and not be testable at all. So I don't necessarily think that it's too complicated. Maybe we can do a better job in explaining it in a simpler way. Probably something that brings complications to Angular is that you need to use TypeScript. You must use TypeScript. We think that it is a best practice and that everyone should use TypeScript. So probably this opinionation is something that could make it a little bit less accessible. Also, ng modules is something that we're trying to remove from the critical learning journey. Mark is saying that it feels like Angular is a more corporate framework for institutions. Yeah, I'll be curious to hear why. I've been thinking about this a lot as well since I'm coming from the startup community. And feels like Angular can reduce the technical risk in startups. So I don't know about that. You can let me know later on. Yeah, that's a great question from Ivailo. I'm curious to hear about the way performance is being measured for the new Ivy engine. Yeah, so for Angular in general, we have a bunch of performance dashboards. This is actually something on our roadmap that we need to work on to revamp again. We have benchmarks written, which are running in WebDriver. So they're running in the browser on some machine. All right, so it's a complicated setup. We have some machines, dedicated machines, that we are sure that there are no any other running process on them, so that we can make sure that we get consistent results from the benchmarks that we are running. So we have written a bunch of end-to-end tests on top of Selenium that we're running in a web browser without any extensions or like anything. We're taking, and we have wrapped this into a framework that we call BenchPress. We are taking the results out of these benchmarks, and we are visualizing them on a dashboard internally. So that's how we're measuring the performance. We have had recently we need to like do some improvements in these dashboards because there were like some changes, but yeah, that's generally what we're doing. There is a question about how about Angular apps being multi-talent friendlier, although it is all possible, but running asynchronous code before bootstrapping the Angular app means not being able to use a lot of Angular package like HTTP client module. Maybe I might be missing something. Yeah, you can share a code example maybe on Twitter in a public message so that we can start discussion there. Probably, my guess is that you shouldn't be blocked by the framework. Mark is sharing some thoughts about why Angular might be good for enterprises. So because it's opinionated, it makes more sense when you already know what you're building and what challenges you're going to face. From a startup point of view, you're constantly figuring out things out of you. So that's why they prefer more flexibility of other frameworks, my impression at least. Yeah, I don't know if the constraints that Angular is setting could be that challenging for a startup. Yeah, I was using Angular for the first startup that I started, Brownie Points. I actually wrote an article, Angular in Production, back then to explain all the challenges that I faced with Angular version, what was it? 2RC1 maybe, or it was in the betas. Yeah, I didn't face any of these issues. What I got from it was that I was able to focus on solving the business problem instead of thinking what cool technologies I can take advantage of. Is it a good practice to perform API calls in route resolver to bootstrap the application? Yeah, you can use route resolver to definitely fetch some data. That's definitely the use case. I'm not sure what do you mean by bootstrap the application, but that's definitely a use case for the route resolvers, yeah. Emil is asking, do you consider to add more decorators to Angular, out-of-the-box decorators? After playing a while with custom decorators, it seems very powerful thing. I don't think we're planning to add more decorators at this point. We don't want to extend our public API surface more than what we already have. There is also interesting thing happening with decorators. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but they're not yet standardized officially. So we have been having a lot of discussions with different representatives from TC39, the JavaScript Standardization Committee, and different folks, and different frameworks as well. We're in a very close collaboration with, let's say, Ember and MobX. So yeah, we came up, I think, with proposal for decorators that is going to be much better fit for browser virtual machines and many others. And decorators should become a standard like soon without too many breakages. So that's pretty exciting. But yeah, to your question, we're not planning to add more decorators at this point. Can you please share a session on best practices and standards to follow for building large-scale Angular applications? Sure, yeah, I can think about that. As a first step, you can try Angular.io/style guide. It should provide you with most of the information that you need, probably except a robust state management solution. For state management, there are different approaches. I guess that's what the main thing that Angular is currently not opinionated about, a state management. So you can use NGRX. A lot of folks have been successful with it, or you can simply use Angular services. And depending on your level of experience, you just need to ensure that you're keeping the state to exist only in a single place without having many places to store it in, so that you can keep your UI in generally consistent. I guess this is probably the biggest challenge with large Angular applications, state management. Otherwise, aside from that, just make sure you use lazy routes, you follow the Angular style guide directory structure, and you should be good. What do you think about using Redux and NGRX for state management together with RxJS so that Angular is responsible only for the view? Switching change detection to on push. It could improve performance. Yeah, especially, I guess this is mostly a decision that you need to make in your team. If everyone is feeling comfortable using RxJS, then definitely go ahead and do that. Alternatively, I would recommend you to hold off, because you may lose a lot of time in explaining different observable operators, and this might not be the best use of your time. Yeah, if that, I hope this answers your question. I'm curious to know the best practice for building high performance apps. Had to create lazy loading mat select, and I find this direction quite interesting. What you could do, yeah, you can use lazy loading on a couple of different levels in Angular. First, you can lazy load routes for sure, the thing that you said that you have read about. You can use just load children from the Angular router, and alternatively, you can also lazy load individual components one by one. This currently is using the ng factory resolver, I think, and from there you can lazy load an ng factory and you can bootstrap it. So yeah, there are. If you type at Google lazy loading Angular components, you're going to get a bunch of articles. There is one module called ngx loadable, I think. So you can take a look at it. It's going to guide you to the way to lazy load individual components. Pretty easy there. Yeah, Akita is good for state management as well. You can take a look at ngxs. Yeah, I'm pretty happy that we're spending that much time in performance optimizations as well. Now we are thinking on how we can make Angular even stricter in terms of making sure that your bundles are as small as possible, because currently web vitals could be primarily impacted by large size of your application bundles. So this is something that we have been looking at. But that's a great question as well from Ivalo. Which CI tool is being used in the monorepo? We have a custom build. We have a custom CI tool. It's called TAP. It's although I guess the CI is not that interesting in the setup. I would say that the build system in Google is the key for managing. Well, the build system and the file system. These are the key for managing the monorepo. Yeah, thank you very much. I'm enjoying really the conversation that we're having. I can consider taking a job. Yeah, happy to hear that. And yeah, also please let me know when you give it a try, what you think. I'd really love to hear your thoughts, Mark. Awesome. I think we have a little bit more time, right? Yeah, we must have like, yeah, we have 8 more minutes. So if you have anything else in mind that you would want to talk about, we can. Thank you. Can I go in a little bit more details about support of micro frontends? Micro frontends. Currently, there is no out-of-the-box support. Module federation is the way that I would recommend, actually. So there are, I guess, a couple of different ways you can go. First, you can just build Angular elements and use them inside of your applications built with other frameworks. But this approach has its own limitations. It's like, I would say that it's technically impossible. Yeah, it's technically impossible with the current state of JavaScript. It's technically impossible to ship small Angular elements. So that's going to be the problem with micro frontends going with Angular elements. However, if you use module federation, things could be a little bit smarter, and you could potentially have better management of your shared dependencies. So currently we have module federation support in Angular version 11 when you opt in into Webpack version 5 and you use a community plugin. Probably this is going to be the way for version 12 as well. However, you wouldn't have to opt in into using Webpack version 5. Hopefully by then, we are going to be able to provide stable support for Webpack version 5. I can recommend you to check the articles by our GD Manfred Steyer. He has been doing a great job in this space, and he has been covering the space, the module federation support. Max is asking about what do you think about the SSR in Angular? Yeah, SSR is good, so feel free to take advantage of it. It's definitely going to bring some performance benefits to your application, especially if you're looking for better SEO and better largest contentful paint. How came up? You try to have every Angular up to date to the same version. I know you have auto updates in browsers and programs, but that's not something you can do with frameworks. But it feels like that's what you're aiming for. Yeah, that's what we're aiming for. Yeah. So the way that Google applications are keeping up to date with Angular is thanks to our team. When we just update the version of Angular in the mono repo, and now they're using it. The way that people outside of Google can keep up to date with Angular is maybe a little bit trickier. Unfortunately, they cannot always rely on, well, they can. So yeah, there are a few different ways, actually. So you can always rely on master on our GitHub build artifacts repo, which should be stable enough because we have already verified that we're not breaking anyone with this commit. So this is probably going to be the easiest way for you to stay up to date with the latest Angular. Or you can have a CI that updates your dependencies constantly. Yeah. I would say that this should be possible. Well, the only variable here when you get updates of the framework is like changes in the framework itself. So I think this should be pretty safe. But having some end-to-end tests, just like smoke tests, sanity checks, just to verify that we're not breaking, like that, we shouldn't be breaking. So this should be safe enough. What we have been doing in Angular is to have, we're using either dependabot or renovate. So when these bots find out that there is a new version of any of our dependencies, they're just opening a pull request. So when our CI passes, it's usually safe to merge. And some folks have been running a CI. So in their CI, they're checking if there is a new version of Angular. If there is a new version of Angular, they're running ng update for their projects, and they're opening a pull request to their repository. And if their build is passing, then they're automatically merging it and using the latest version. So yeah, these are I guess 3 options that you can choose from. Probably ng update experience is the better option, because if we want to really release some automated updates, you'll be able to take advantage of them. yeah, if there is a breaking, if a dependency breaks your project, in case of Renovate bot, for example, it opens the pull request, it can break your build, and from there you can just like decide to not merge it and make the update manually. That's what we usually do, and that's the common practice. But I'll definitely recommend you looking at Renovate. It's free for open source projects. Like, it's not associated with Google in any way. I think it's developed by a small startup. Renovate bot. It's a really cool project. It also Dependable is really cool. GitHub acquired it, so I think that's the name of the project, of the other one. Yeah, thank you very much for joining. Yeah, I really enjoyed chatting with everyone here, and thank you very much for the questions. Yeah, if you have any other questions, you can ping me. I would recommend you in a public message on Twitter, because like that's going to be a better way to have a conversation open with everyone. Yeah, thank you very much for joining the meetup.